With Wally Marcus. Divorce Research with Professor David Sbarra. Support for Divorce TV provided in part by the Center for Divorce Mediation, 520-577-1202. Welcome to Divorce TV. I'm Wally Marcus, your host, and I've been a divorce mediator for 25 years. Our topic today is divorce research, and my very special guest is Professor David Sbarra from the University of Arizona. You can get more information about our show and our program and our guests, or contact us with questions at the bottom of at the screen. Dave, welcome.
Thank you.
This has been it's a real special treat for me. I'm married to a clinical psychologist, so it's nice to talk to another clinical psychologist who's not my wife. But, but we're going to talk more about that. Maybe that's an issue. I don't know. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm a professor at the University of Arizona. I've been on the faculty for 4 years here, and I'm also a clinical psychologist, and I have my degree from the University of Virginia, and most of my research focuses on how people deal with stressful life events, and I can say a lot more about it, but basically how people recover from difficult experiences in their lives. So as a faculty member at the university, I do a lot of research and spend time teaching my courses. And
a lot of this deals with divorce and marriage and your research?
My research deals almost exclusively.
That's a good question.
Yeah,
Well, tell us a little bit more about what your research actually is.
So my research deals almost exclusively with divorce at this point. We do studies about how young adults deal with and cope with non-marital breakups, but we have two large federally funded projects from the National Institute of Health dedicated to understanding. The first one is really about the risk for depression following a divorce experience, so the risk for diagnosable clinical depression following marital separation.
It would seem to me that it would almost go without saying that you'd have depression without after a divorce case.
Yes, so the question is, for most everyone, very difficult experience and associated with a lot of emotional turmoil and upheaval and hardship, but for some people it's particularly difficult, and they get tracked into these periods where they're really struggling, and this struggle and this persistent grief can turn into an episode of clinical depression. So we're trying to understand that piece in particular of what that balance is between grief and depression.
So it's the primary thing that you study. What other things have you been studying?
Well, so the second project is really aimed at taking a close look at the health correlates of divorce, and in particular the physical health correlates of the psychological stress that accompanies divorce. And in this other project we study people over time, and in particular the first 9 months or so of a separation experience, and we bring them into our lab at the university on campus and talk to them about their separation while we hook up all kinds of different physiological equipment and measure different aspects of their cardiovascular system and their blood pressure response as they're thinking about the events in their lives. So those are the two studies, but I've been involved since I was a graduate student in a variety of different projects.
Matter of fact, I think one of the things one of the books you're cited in, or as a thank you in the book that Robert Emery did, The Truth About Children Divorce, which I think is always a great book, and all of us who do divorce work really enjoy.
Right.
I was impressed that you were cited by him, and I remember him mentioning you when I went to actual seminar that you taught. So
yeah.
It was one of the nice things about getting to meet you and talk to you now. How did you begin to study these things?
Well, so there's a sort of couple levels to that.
Okay, go ahead.
Right? How I began to study, how I got interested in it personally was that when I was a college freshman, I actually had a very difficult experience. I had spine surgery after my freshman year in college, and I spent most of that summer lying on the couch, really immobile, and just sort of not doing anything. And I'd been really heavily into sports, and I had this surgery, and I was totally upended and just sort of lying there thinking about what I wanted my life to be like. And I really got interested in how people make sense of difficult experiences and how people sort of revise their life to get on with things and to deal with things that have been difficult for them. And it was in college that I started thinking, gosh, the study of difficult experiences, depression, stressful events, I might be interested in psychology, and started moving in that direction, tracking that direction. And I was involved in studying close relationships, and I went to graduate school, and I was pursuing my degree in clinical psychology primarily to be a clinical child psychologist, and I was very interested in children and got involved. I worked with Bob Emery as a graduate student and was interested in how kids adjust to divorce and how kids cope with the experiences. But I found understanding how adults manage to be as equally of interest. And I was interested, again, in this change process and the idea that we're moving along in our lives and something very difficult happens to us and completely knocks us out of our orbit, and we're just spinning out there and sort of untethered to what our reality is, and then we gradually come back and join planet Earth again. I mean, I don't mean to sort of speak about it in a lighthearted way, but that process was something I was very interested in understanding.
And you've been doing this research. What have been some of the surprising findings that you found in some of your studies, particularly in this divorce adjustment?
So there are a couple. One of them comes out of the work that I did with Bob Emery at Virginia, and he, you may know, he has a large study of divorce mediation, and the project started in the 1980s, was one of the first, well, actually is one of the only randomized controlled trials of divorce mediation. So the whole point of this is that it was an experiment, so you can infer causation from their effects. And so what they did, just in brief, was they had people either go into custody disputes through the court system or be assigned to mediate their disputes at a time when not everyone was mediating, right? So where I came, I mean, the study started when I was about 7 years old. So when I became involved, right, so it wasn't, I came involved as a graduate student, and we were doing a 12-year follow-up. And I was running all over Virginia, meeting with these people, talking with them, and collecting data on this long-term follow-up study. And one of the, I think the most surprising thing that came out of a lot of this was the finding that for people who had been in the mediation group, the experience of mediation was associated with, so let me back up. Say the idea is that you know well about mediation. And the idea is that some forms of mediation are what we might call more therapeutic mediation. So you're seeking to sort of help people come to a good decision that they can live with, but also help them understand more about their emotional experience and get a handle on that. And that was the kind of mediation
I've actually done the mediation that happens even if you're not trying to do it.
Right.
There is some.
So the idea here, the finding here, was that for people in the mediation group, experience much more longing, regret, and just feelings that the divorce was a big, terrible mistake. And so it's counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, I would be surprised.
And the way we try to understand and make sense of this is that basically if you think that you have a